Hello and welcome to the Wonder and Whimsy Podcast. I'm Kimberly and this is.
David.
And today we are going to be discussing the philosophy of freedom, determinism versus free will. And we're going to be examining a couple of poems and a couple of different philosophical quotes. The first one we're going to be reading and discussing is called Singularity by Marie Howe. The next poem will be America by Tony Hoagland. And we'll talk a little bit about Descartes, Nietzsche, all that good stuff. So if you like philosophy and literature, please subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, and we'll dive in. So would you like to read this poem?
Sure. Yeah. Super stoked on the subject. Because I mean the idea is freedom and illusion, I think is something that is like important for us to examine as humans. And this happens to be one of my favorite poems. So I will gladly read it. So it's called Singularity. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity we once were? So compact, nobody needed a bed or food or money. Nobody hiding in the school bathroom or home alone, pulling open the drawer where the pills are kept. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Remember, there was no nature, no them, no tests to determine if the elephant grieves her calf or if the coral reef feels pain. Trashed oceans don't speak English or Farsi or Thai. Before we came to believe humans were so important, before this awful loneliness, can molecules recall it? What once was? Before anything happened? No I, no we, no one, no was, no verb, no noun. Only a tiny, tiny dot brimming with is, all, everything, home. And I think something I really love about that poem is just that her daughter was learning about the time before the Big Bang and
Mm-hmm.
just this like kind of idea of everything is kind of one.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Howe is one of like the most beautiful poets, like in terms of imagery and taking an idea and just forming language with it. So it's so fortunate her daughter was learning this to get this wonderful poem. And I just kind of I don't know. I love the thought of the idea of all of us, all energy, all of us together as like one singularity thing. And we
Mm-hmm.
all it's really easy to forget that.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like the this whole poem sort of undermines individualism because it suggests that we're fragments of a once whole existence. So it makes you think about we feel like we're separate as human beings. Like I feel like I'm a separate human being from you, but we all originated from the same energy pre-Big Bang, we were all the same thing. We're all made up of the same atoms, the same molecules. Um, so in terms of the question of free will versus determinism, this sort of raises the question that is there a cosmic determinism to it all? If we all originated from stardust, if we all came from the same consciousness or the same oneness, then then are all of our choices predetermined by cosmic forces? To me, that's what this poem makes me wonder. I definitely think it leans more towards a determinist outlook than the free will perspective. Although, alternatively, embracing togetherness, it could be sort of like a different lens on looking at freedom. Like instead of looking at freedom as individualism, looking at freedom as collective harmony. So in some way, you could look at consciousness. So if our consciousness is trapped in this illusion of separation, then you could look at joining back together, connecting, and existing in harmony. Perhaps that's a different way of looking at freedom. So in some ways, this poem, I think, could support determinism, and it could also support free will, depending on how you look at it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in the name of like science and everything else and just kind of our unselfish need to make an impact and
Hmm.
be remembered, I think is something that like it gets lost on kind of this beautiful togetherness that I think that like she's kind of referring to in this poem of like I don't know. It's everyone dies alone, you know? It's something where we can feel we can feel how we feel about things. I just think that it's really important to just acknowledge how this kind of beautiful collectivism is
Yeah.
uh is kind of illustrated from this like natural interdependence that we have just as humans. Like I think that like um it just gets lost and humans by nature, I mean, are mammals and we're empathetic, you know, and
Hmm.
I think that like I think there's always a choice. You know, I think that like we always have a choice for freedom and we always have it like we always have that kind of freedom of choice, but I think that like there is there is something that we can tap into that is shared that we can't perceive. And because we can't perceive it, we think that like we need to make our imprint on this earth. And we're kind of like have this I have it too sometimes. Like I want my art to be remembered. I want to be remembered. I want like it could be something silly like I want something cool in my gravestone, like Roald Tenenbaum-esque, like he died of puppies from drowning ship. But like at the end of the day, I think that a lot of our focus on how we live, especially coming from America, which I know segues nice into the next one, is
Hmm.
um, we have a need to always be heightening our status, to always be heightening the money we have, or like the power that we kind of self-create within our community. We want to look good by our peers, and we want to like we don't want to show us being lazy or whatever. Like the values becomes to how much money you make, what car you drive, how interesting your job sounds, or the status of your job. Like it's kind of the wrong things that we care about. It's not how much you love your pets. It's not how you love your children. It's not how good of a partner you are, how much you care about progressing culturally, like expanding your mind, expanding your love. And I think those are really, end of the day, much more important than this kind of this individualism that like is rampant, especially in America, of we have to constantly be doing stuff. We have to constantly be better. So I think that like I think it's I sometimes uh group freedom with individualism, and that is not always the fairest um um, conjoining
Yeah.
of things, but I really do think that tapping into this kind of collectivism that is beautiful. Like Mary Howe made it sound amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that that's important, and that it's not you're making a conscious choice to do that. So you're having the freedom to do that, but you are tapping into something that is um wondrous in a way, like being at one. I don't know, like I know you do yoga a lot, like you tapping in and feeling like you're in the zone.
Hmm.
Like I'm wondering, like, have you ever felt like you were flowing with the natural like aspect of it all, or natural like flowiness of the earth?
Yes. There's many times, especially if I'm practicing yoga or just still meditation, and still meditation is an aspect of yoga. So if I'm just sitting and meditating, technically that's yoga. But whether I'm doing moving meditation or still meditation, especially if I'm out in nature, I've had moments where I feel completely disconnected from my social identity that I've created, that I've clung to, and felt more connected to sort of this infinite isness. One of my favorite mantras actually is just I am, not I am this, I am that, not like because sometimes I'll set little mantras for my yoga students when I'm teaching yoga. I'll give them like suggestive mantras, I am healing, I am peaceful, I am centered, I am strong, I am capable. Like so, the power of positive thinking. But one of my favorite mantras isn't I am peaceful, I am strong, I am centered. It's simply I am. And it's really hard to articulate in words how it feels, but there are moments, not every time when I'm practicing yoga or meditation, but there are moments where I definitely feel disconnected to my body, disconnected to my social identity, and connected to something deeper, something beyond um, who I think I am or who I want to be, or beyond how other people perceive me. Um, and it feels freeing. It definitely feels freeing in a way. So going back to what I was saying, typically, when we talk about the philosophical concept of free will versus determinism, determinism, people who believe that everything is predetermined by something that happened before, whether that's biology, environment, or social constructs, right? That free will is an illusion. And then people who believe in free will believe the opposite, that we do have the power to make conscious choices uh, that aren't dependent on external forces. But perhaps this poem offers sort of a different insight into what freedom can be. Perhaps freedom doesn't necessarily just mean individual choice. Perhaps there's a sense of freedom we can experience if we let go of our attachment to our social identity, let go of to this narrative that human beings are more important than nature, and tap into something else. That can feel freeing, I think. Like I love this particular line that she writes. So when sky was earth, and animal was energy, and rock was liquid, and stars were space, and space was not, at all nothing. Before we came to believe humans were so important. I love trying to think about before we believed that we were more important than nature as human beings. Many of us walk around with this sense of self-importance, and we take ourselves so seriously, and we think that that we're so important, that our choices really, really matter. But when we can kind of let go of that, like uptight, oh, I have to, like you were saying, like, oh, I have to like accomplish these things. I have to make my mark on the world. I have to make my impact to feel important. When we can kind of let go of that, I think that could actually feel freeing. So it's just a different way of looking at freedom, I think. is what she proposes here. And I love this last little bit. Only a tiny, tiny dot brimming with is. Like she repeats is. And it makes me think of this concept of infinite isness, infinite infinity, right? All, everything, home. I don't know. I think this poem is really, really beautiful. I could read it multiple times and probably get something different out of it each time. So, but yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer to your question. But yes, there are definitely moments where I feel a sense of freedom when I'm meditating or practicing yoga. But I think there's a lot of other ways you can kind of feel free, and maybe that sense of freedom is an illusion. I don't know. But I think I think these concepts are important to kind of talk about and think about. So,
I love that word isness. You used it like multiple times, and yeah, it's a great word. Yeah, to kind of answer your, I guess, question from two, or whatever, a little while ago. Determinism or free will. I really think that we do have free will, but we have a lot of external factors that kind of control our modality of thinking.
hmm
And I think we can kind of get to that more when we talk about, like, I think, therefore I am, Descartes.
yeah.
But like, we are constantly ruled by our, like, our needs, essentially, as humans. And it's a lot, like, we want to think we have a lot more free will than we do. And
hmm
our dichotomy of thoughts. We think that we have, like, total power over, this is what I'm doing. But, like, if you're hungry, if you are tired, or if any of these things that our common needs it
hmm
is very are overpowering to us. And it really dictates a lot more of our life than we think they do. And, like, the fact that we can, if we look at children, there's four categories you can put them in terms of what their attachment style is, and that
hmm
becomes a lot. um those attachment styles still prevail when you're adults, just in much more complex ways. So the fact that behaviors are so similar just across, just like Homo sapiens, just across humans, it's just like, it shows that our our train of thought and our thoughts are not as independent as we think they are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, yes, we obviously have free will. We obviously can make choices. I think it's a lot more limited um, than just kind of what the average person thinks. And I totally 100%, like, I think we're saying a lot of the same things is because, like, I totally agree that um, self-importance and ego, just in general, it just is just this, like, thing that we just pour into, rather than thinking about um like, kind of this beautiful oneness and stuff,
hmm
and, like, what we're talking about, this isness.
hmm
um, and before, and it's kind of cool because science definitely, like, the more you get into science, like, at one point we thought the earth was the center of the universe, and we thought, oh, our solar system was the center of the universe. And
hmm
but we even ostracized, like, Galileo. Like,
Yeah.
he was excommunicated
Yeah.
because he proved the prevailing authority at the time, which was the Roman Church, wrong.
hmm
And they, I think, finally forgave him like 400 years after his death or whatever. It was just, like, crazy. So it's just, we have this almost innate need to be more important. And I think it really clouds our judgment just as humans to really what is actually around us.
hmm Yes. You brought up a very interesting point about attachment theory, which I've studied a lot about in my psychology classes. And I remember in my childhood development psychology classes learning about how when children are born, we go through these different developmental stages, and there's the egocentric phase where you think that the world revolves around you when you're really, really young. You actually think that, and it takes a while to learn that, oh, the world probably doesn't revolve around me, that I'm not the center of the universe, right? But as adults, some people, I think some adults never grow out of that childhood development stage. I also remember learning about how uh, I think like 90% of your personality, psychologists believe that like 90% of your personality is determined by the age of 2, based on your environment, based on your genetics, and based on every little thing that happens to you once you're 2 years old. I might be getting the statistics wrong, but I think once you're 2 years old, psychologists believe that like most of your personality is already predetermined, and your attachment style is already sort of there by the time you're 2 years old. So if that's true, how much control do we really have over our choices? How much control do we really have over our thoughts? Even though when we have these thoughts, it feels like we have the freedom to choose. It certainly feels like free will exists. But psychologists might beg to differ because it's very clear that childhood experiences shape adult behavior and relationships, and we are very much a product of our upbringing. So now a counterpoint to that would be, okay, so if you and I become aware of our attachment um, uh, style, or however you put it, like if we become aware of our attachment style, if we become aware of how our upbringing shapes our personality, that sense of awareness could perhaps allow for growth and change. So, for instance, say like there's a part of my personality that I just don't like anymore. If I make a conscious effort through therapy, reflection, perhaps I can change. So that's sort of the counterpoint to that determinist view. But I mean, there's a lot of psychological theory that definitely supports determinism.
Yeah, and I think that like what you said last, because it's something I discovered I had an attachment style, like relatively
Mhm.
recently, because I started therapy earlier this year, it was late last year, early this year. Um, and like basically for a session, my therapist, she told me, you have an anxious attachment style. And
Mm.
that caused me to dive into that. And I was like, oh,
Hmm.
interesting. I knew I had some abandonment issues and stuff like that, but I
Mm.
had no idea that I developed like a very specific attachment style. So I have been working reframing and other things in order to kind of become a secure attached person. And it's something where we do have the power to change. I
Hmm.
do believe we do have choice. I believe that the majority of our choices are dictated by kind of what you're describing, where a lot of our personality is formed at a very young age,
Hmm.
and it can just get further, solidified by either traumatic experiences, relationships, what have you, can help define your not just like the choice you have, but your actions. And it's something
Hmm.
where like um the fact that we're able to consciously make a choice to do a podcast and talk right now, I think is um, proof of free will. But at the same time, the window from which we see it, I think, is much, much more narrow than than it than we think than we think we have. Because for me, I'm a very opinionated person. I love doing research and things that I find interesting, and I love
Hmm.
checking myself a lot, and just checking in and making sure that I'm living a certain way. And so Um, yeah, it's a really interesting topic because um, ego seeps in a lot to just things that we do just because we enjoy them, and I think it's important to kind of always like um, realize that we're just a little small dot in a giant sea of everything.
Yeah. I wonder if you would consider yourself more of a compatibilist, because compatibilism is the belief that we do have freedom within conditioning. So compatibilists believe that free will and determinism can coexist if we change the way we look at free will. So I wonder if that's sort of more where your viewpoints lie. Um, but I am curious to dive into this next poem. Do you want to read this next one?
I can, or do you want to take this one?
Oh,
Uh,
sure. It doesn't matter. This is Tony Hoagland's. I hope I'm saying that name
yeah,
right.
that's Tony Hope.
Tony Hoagland's America. So let me find this. So this definitely ties into what we were just talking about, but in a slightly different way. So let me pull this up.
And I don't mind if you'd prefer, because I read it. I'm reading it from my phone, so if that's easy
Um,
to read it, and whichever you prefer.
no, I have it.
Okay.
So I'm reading it off a website. Okay, here we go. America. Then one of the students with blue hair and a tongue stud says that America is for him, a maximum security prison, whose walls are made of Radio Shacks and Burger Kings and MTV episodes, where you can't tell the show from the commercials. And as I consider how to express how full of shit I think he says that even when he's driving to the mall in his Isuzu, Trooper with a gang of his friends, letting rap music pour over them like a boiling jacuzzi full of ball peen hammers, even then he feels buried alive, captured and suffocated in the folds of the thick satin quilt of America. And I wonder if this is a legitimate category of pain, or whether he is just spin doctoring a better grade. And then I remember that when I stabbed my father in the dream last night, it was not blood, but money that gushed out of him. Bright green $100 bills spilling from his wounds. And this is the weird part. He gasped. Thank God those Ben Franklins were clogging up my heart. And so I perish happily, freed from that which kept me from my liberty. Which was when I knew it was a dream, since my dad would never speak in rhymed couplets. And I look at the student with his acne and cell phone and phony ghetto clothes, and I think, I am asleep in America too. And I don't know how to wake myself either. And I remember what Marx said near the end of his life. I was listening to the cries of the past when I should have been listening to the cries of the future. But how could he have imagined 100 channels of 24-hour cable, or what kind of nightmare it might be, when each day you watch rivers of bright merchandise run past you, and you are floating in your pleasure boat upon this river, even while others are drowning underneath you, and you see their faces twisting in the surface of the waters, and yet it seems to be your own hand which turns the volume higher. Thoughts?
Yeah, I love this poem. Uh,
Mm,
I mean, it's talking about late stage capitalism and just like how I don't know how we're defined by our it's cool. I like the particular line that I really, really love is just when he quotes Marx about
Hmm.
um and then follows it up like, but how could he have imagined 100 channels, a 24-hour cable? What kind of nightmare it might
Yeah.
be? They You watch rivers of ripe merchandise run past you, and you're floating in your pleasure boat upon this river, even while others are drowning underneath you, and you see their face twisting in the surface of the waters. Yet it seems to be your own hand which turns the volume higher. I think that's like
Mhm.
so beautiful how we like succinct that because it's true. I mean, we just storage units are the most like fastest growing business in America. We have so much stuff, we need a place for our stuff.
Yeah.
Like we keep buying and buying and buying and buying, and it's crazy. We want to be constantly distracted. We want to just have the newest best thing, like whatever it is. It could be something where it's like a health product, or it could be something where you want the latest iPhone because it does this or this. Like we definitely like consume way too much in this country. And I think like we are very dictated by corporations that just feed us shit or is telling us that we're not enough. We need this to be better. Or someone's going to like you if you presented yourself in this way or had this watch or smelled like this cologne. I mean, it's like we're
Yeah.
constantly bombarded and it's like getting worse because I don't know what your average screen time is. Mine's way too high. You know, it's like basically half of a day.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm making a real conscious choice to lower that and to not be as plugged in because even the ergonomics of just scrolling on your phone. it,
Mm.
it's people thought of that in order to addict you to that more.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're constantly like Amazon Prime didn't used to have ads when you're just an Amazon Prime member. Now everything has ads. It's just anything to enter our mind and learn like targeted ads for what you look at just online, what you say. It just we are products to these companies. We are potential buyers, and they are taking our information and feeding us things that they think that we want.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like corporations are brainwashing us into consuming junk that we don't really need, that is not really going to ultimately fulfill us. Uh, that's why if you're having a conversation with someone, an ad will pop up on your phone related to that conversation. I completely agree with you. Many of our choices feel like programmed responses in that regard when it comes to the stuff that we buy or the things that we think we need to buy, like specific clothes to look a certain status or a specific car to look a certain social status or just all the crap that we buy that we don't really need. It very much feels like brainwashing. And so when you look at capitalism in this regard, it definitely feels like determinism. It doesn't feel like we necessarily are thinking for ourselves all the time, that we're just programmed by these corporations that are literally programming us. However, you could argue the contrary, that the more aware we are of how corporations are trying to control us, we can choose to reject consumerism. We can choose to resist and decide, no, I don't need that fancy car. I'm not gonna be fooled into thinking I have to like buy all this materialistic crap. You can reject it. So in that regard, maybe we do have more free will than it seems. Um,
Yeah.
and again, you could argue that that choice was also predetermined. So
No, and I think I have to look into compatib compatibilityism or
compatibilism, yeah.
compatibilism.
Yeah.
haven't heard that because I think I am in the camp of free will. I
Hmm.
just think that like I have such I'm such an opinionated person that I have to be like, wait, this is, you know, not everything is a choice of mine, but and I think like we also have to consider like the majority of people aren't like you and me. They're they don't work on commercials or stuff like that and see the ways that companies are operating behind the scenes from color palettes to everything else in order to like
Manipulate.
manipulate us. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy for me to see it because I work in commercials.
Yeah.
I do film and TV,
Yeah.
and I see the little things that happen that program us to think a certain way. Just even how characters are written.
Yeah.
Um,
Colors trigger appetite. Colors trigger certain things. Yeah.
yeah, or they trigger the company that there is. Like they wanted to get rid of all these blue pillows from this DirecTV commercial because they had to buy so many of them because they had to change the whole color palette for something so minor. But in your head, you associate this happy, loving commercial with blue, which is DirecTV,
Hmm.
and it's something where it's crazy the lengths that they go to that we don't realize. And
Hmm.
so I think that, or the majority doesn't realize. So I think the majority, it's proven through the growth of these businesses of storage units that are the fastest growing company in America. And
Hmm.
like they're starting to put laws on them because they're taking like there's a bowling alley that I filmed at, I think it was last year, the year prior, that this amazing Super Bowl commercial. We had like, 10 A-listers and all this stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and a month later, that bowling alley turned into a storage unit. And it's just like it's heartbreaking because it takes the culture and identity away from the place. It
Yeah.
ruins the specialness of what we hold as sacred, so we have more stuff that we don't necessarily really need. So it's something where I think the majority of people um don't realize how much they're being controlled on a day to day. And I think
Yeah.
us, it's a lot easier to
Yes.
to sit here and be like, oh yeah, well, we can reject it. The awareness, I think you're making such a great point. If we're aware of it, we can reject it. I think the majority of people just aren't aware.
Yeah. And it's if you see what goes on behind the scenes, it can definitely help raise your awareness. Um, I love this part of the poem when he says, and then I remember that when I stabbed my father in the dream last night, it was not blood, but money that gushed out of him, bright green $100 bills spilling from his wounds. And this is the weird part. He gasped, thank God. Those Ben Franklins were clogging up my heart. And it just makes me think about if our minds are so distracted by chasing money, if we're programmed to think that we have to have money and that's all we're meant for is just to make money, and the more money we have, the more valuable we are. If we're distracted by that narrative, we don't have the headspace to think critically about why. Why do we have to chase money? Why do we need these Ben Franklins? Why? Um, So, I think it takes a certain situation maybe to kind of wake people up or raise awareness. Maybe just reading a poem like this, that's the power of literature. Perhaps if someone read this poem, it might make them think, yeah, I spend most of my time just like chasing money. And I read a quote one time, I can't remember who said it, that it's not money that destroys people, but it's the love of money. And I thought that was really profound because money itself isn't necessarily inherently evil, but when you start loving money and that becomes your whole point of existence, then that's when you're just living a very, I think, shallow, vain. You're chasing something that isn't ultimately fulfilling. Like, you might think that, like, oh, if my bank account has six figures or whatever, then I'll be happy. But we forget that, like, happiness comes from within. It's not dependent on external circumstances necessarily. Um, so I really like this poem because this poem alone could help raise awareness about capitalism and how we're constantly being manipulated and brainwashed into thinking we have to chase money all the time. When no, you don't have to do that. You could choose to reject that if you want to. So,
So something that you just said, your quote about the power of money or the love of money
hmm
reminds me of the Jimi Hendrix quote, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. And I always thought that was so wonderful because, you know, like we definitely and I in essence, it's not just money by itself. It's the power that comes along with money,
hmm
So I mean, I think in America we value power, and power we see as status, like
hmm
celebrity, someone's wealth definitely goes into that. What car they drive, how they present themselves,
hmm
who they wear, what brands they have on, what car they drive. I think that like the love of those things definitely is a killer. Those things by themselves are not necessarily bad, but when you infuse those things with importance
hmm
is when the problem really arises because it's at the end of the day, stuff is stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you are the king of Egypt in some like, indigenous society, uh,
hmm
that has never heard of that. I mean, we place such importance on just a very narrow mindset that really is not a transferable thing, because other cultures or other places or that gets out of trend, things that actually matter can stand the test of time and can stand the test of place, you know. And
hmm
so I think that's like I think that's a really kind of interesting thing to consider. And I do equally love that. The the it's the love of money itself, not the not actually money, because money is actually I can't imagine a world without it and how we could exist like just based off of like a barter system or something. Like money itself is so important.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the money itself isn't necessarily inherently evil. It's our relationship to it. And when we start coveting money or coveting a material possession in a way that isn't healthy, that's what makes it destructive. And I love that quote by Jimi Hendrix. Um, uh, love, what was it? The
Yep.
power of love overcomes the love of power.
The world of no peace. Yeah.
Yeah, um, that's great because um, power is kind of a tricky thing because in some way, I think power is a bit of an illusion as well. Um, it may feel like people with money have power over other people, but that's only if the person agrees to that relationship. You know what I'm saying? Like there are ways to revolt. There are ways to kind of subvert someone who's trying to have power over you. There are ways of resisting that. But again, it requires a very conscious effort. And so I don't know if sometimes I wonder, if freedom is an illusion and also if power is actually an illusion. And going back to this concept of power and what we were talking about earlier about collectivism and togetherness and unity, uh, don't you think that together we're more powerful than we are apart? I mean, just mathematically, like scientifically, if we all come together towards a common goal, isn't that a lot more powerful than working against each other?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean that's like perfect in the current political environment we're in.
Yeah.
Is I think it is, I think what you're talking about is exactly spot on. I think that like we see this kind of power in individualism in
Yeah.
terms of, and it's an ego thing,
Hmm.
right? It's an ego thing that we want to do, like we were talking about leaving our imprint on the world and all this stuff. But yeah, we are so much more powerful when we're working as one and we
Hmm.
are in this kind of collective nature. And it's something where I have to interact with so many people, like just on my day to day. We're not so different, just as humans.
Yeah.
We generally are really empathetic. We handle stress in a rainbow of ways. We
Hmm.
communicate, not effectively always, but at the end of the day, most humans are doing what they think is right. And
Hmm.
they are empathetic creatures. And we are being told by the news channels we're listening to or whatever else why the other side is wrong. Or we're being pit against each other just from like a young age, like just competitive sports or whatever. Like we are trained to see what good and evil is based off of anyone's religion or anything. We're there's always a dichotomy. Oh, these are the bad people. These are the good people. We want to be like these good people here, and these bad people need to be shamed,
Hmm.
or we need to be better than them, or we need to defeat them, or anything. I'm sure that soldiers going into battle or fighting another side have much more in common with each other than they think they do. Like we had to brainwash people going to Vietnam and to
Yeah.
humanizing the Vietnamese because it was easier for them to kill them. And it's how, as awful as that sounds, like we are trained and for variety of ways to make us, I don't know, like to compare and compete with others.
Yeah.
And I think that like going back 2000 or 3000 BC when Lao Tzu uh, created the Tao Te Ching and
Hmm.
stone tablets, like everything. He's like uh, he talks about um, peacefulness of when you erode comparing or competing, when you let go of that,
Yeah.
you will achieve peace. And I think that's such a beautiful way to look at the world and to look at kind of this collectivism that we're talking about is we're not so different. And
Hmm.
a lot of what reasons we think we are is because of conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and going back to what you were saying earlier too about how we're all driven by the same biological needs. We all are driven to survive, to eat, sleep, procreate. So, and we're all made up of the same types of energy and atoms. So, scientifically speaking, I think we are a lot more alike than we are different. So it's really easy for me to look at you and say, no, you're different. You're other. You're something separate from me. But if we can start to focus more on our commonalities and see each other as one, a collective consciousness, perhaps, then I think that might actually be a means to transcend determinism in a sense. You also brought up that podcast about telepathy. So, if we are part of a collective consciousness, which is suggested by things like ESP, lucid dreaming, theoretical physics, string theory, dark matter, all of those concepts suggest that we actually are part of a collective consciousness. So, in that sense, perhaps individual free will is an illusion. But if we're not limited by just our main five senses, if that to me feels like we're only limited by five senses, if we can tap into that sixth sense, like ESP, lucid dreaming, or whatnot, if we can tap into that, then perhaps we can access broader awareness, and expanding consciousness could be a way to transcend determinism and find a new sense of freedom collectively as one. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a total
Okay.
sense because I think that like science is so focused on materialism, like
Yeah.
what we can see, what we can feel, what we can prove.
Yeah.
And science definitely contradicts itself in a lot of ways with string theory and with
Yeah.
throwing to create the Big Bang theory to have it make sense. We have to account for a lot more matter and energy than we can perceive, which is only 5% of the known universe we can only perceive.
Yeah.
And according to string theory, it's 10 dimensions. At most humans, we can barely process a time dimension, but at most humans can process three spatial and one time dimension.
Hmm.
So there's six other dimensions that are happening around us that, I mean, obviously it spurned a lot of like media and pop culture around it with like the multiverse and all this stuff. But in reality, we don't know. Science doesn't know. So why is materialism such a founding building block of science where pop science or whatever they want to call it to discredit it is like we have to really start getting rid of this notion that um, science has to be materialistic in nature, that we have to be able to know that it's there is stuff around us that we're not aware of.
Hmm.
And this type of collectivism and being at one and not trying to discredit something because it sounds hokey is really kind of like I think a really interesting point of discussion. And what the telepathy tapes had an issue with is um, science's innate need for materialism and casting aside people that think differently and outside of that. So
Yeah.
um, I 100% agree with everything you're saying, and I think it's really important to just consider that we don't know as much as we think we do,
Yeah.
and um, seeing is not necessarily believing because we are trapped within these bodies that um, can only perceive the world how our biological makeup allows us to perceive it. So even the way we see colors, like when I took a psychology class, I was really interested to know that black, which is the absence of color, um, it, so things that are the color that we're seeing, that's just light reflecting off of it and giving us the notion of what that color is not. So just how we perceive things is so skewed to what things actually are. So it's just like it's interesting to know that we are we never know as much as we think we do. And I think that's what like Socrates is famous for saying, like, um, I am smart because I know how much I don't know, or whatever that
Yeah.
quote is.
The greatest knowledge is knowing I know nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, the greatest knowledge is it's exactly right. The greatest knowledge is knowing I know nothing.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And it's so
Yeah.
true. And I think it feeds to your earlier point of we can grow more together.
Hmm.
And the separatist mindset, this individualistic mindset that we're programmed to constantly, I think should be I think it hurts that. It hurts that
Hmm.
mentality, and I think that we have to learn to grow from that. And growing together is the way forward. And I think collectivism in terms of just tapping into things that are seem otherworldly. I think that's really, really important for us to do and to think outside the box.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep an open mind. And all science is a theory. Science is just a big mathematical theory. It's a philosophy. There's no hardcore proof. And like you said, what is the percentage of dark matter? Like,
It's I think it's like 20 or 30% of
yeah,
matter, and
so
then dark energy is like 50 or 60. It's like comes up to like equaling 95% of
like
the universe
nine.
is dark energy or matter.
Right, and we don't understand what that is. So there's still so much about the universe that we don't know. We've probably barely scratched the surface in understanding consciousness, why we're here, the meaning of life. So I think it's very important to keep an open mind and just trust that there is more to life than meets the eye. And I also think it's important to stay curious, but going back to what you said about kind of embracing collectivism, I think one way of doing that is to stop taking our social identity so seriously. Like, for instance, as an actor, I practice the craft of completely shedding my ego, letting go of any preconceived notion of who I think I am or who I want to be, and allowing myself to become someone completely different and shift my perspective for the sake of storytelling. And if I can get to a place where that feels really real and really authentic, it feels transcendent. It feels like I've become someone else and I'm not trapped inside my skin. Because I don't really like the feeling of being trapped in just my skin, my brain, my body. I get bored. I'm with myself all the time. So I feel like as an actor, it's like a unique way of sort of exploring what it might feel like, to just live in someone else's skin. And, when you study psychology or try to look at life from a different perspective, it can help you become more empathetic and realize that, yeah, who we are is constantly evolving, constantly changing. It's not stagnant. Like you and I are under no obligation to be the same person we were 5 minutes ago. We can change if we choose to. If you believe in free will and you believe that humans can change, we can choose to evolve and transcend, so to speak. So I do appreciate how acting, you know, is sort of like a unique way of opening one's mind to deconstruct our social identity and not get so attached to our social identity. Like, oh, I have to always behave this way because this is how I define myself, kind of thing. And I take it very seriously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's something that's interesting. It's like I you come from such a unique position because you're an actor that um has to become someone else for roles and all this stuff, but you are also someone who does movement and sitting meditation, who
Hmm.
get one with themselves and has to kind of almost fully embrace themselves because it's hard. Like um when people are going through like yoga, like it's a lot of people like active yoga and corpse pose is like the hardest pose for some people because they have to sit with themselves
Yeah.
and they have to sit with themselves in silence.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting. It's like for me, that's my favorite. It's my favorite to do a really long yoga sesh and work really hard and then just lay there and that's my reward. Um, but like, and I talk to other people, oh, it was not awesome. And they're like, no, I can't. Like they just want to grab their phone or they want to do, it's boring for them. And it's something that's, you have both sides. You have almost becoming someone else, filling their shoes in terms of the method nature of acting.
Hmm.
But you also have that centered piece of, I have to be comfortable with myself fully. And I think that's a really like amazing combination. um, to really like check yourself in a lot of ways. And
Hmm.
because that's what a lot of it is. It's like having that kind of ego death is really, really kind of important, I think, as people to just not take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah.
And it's something where you have a very unique lens on that because of your things you do to not love money, but to make money.
Yeah, no, that's great that you enjoy corpse pose. I love it when people say they actually enjoy, because I've been teaching yoga since 2017, and I often explain like Shavasana, corpse pose is the integration. It's the most important pose. The reason we move in yoga is to prep our body for still meditation. And in the average American in our society, we're so programmed to constantly be moving and we're so overly stimulated with cell phones and technology that sitting still with our thoughts can be quite challenging. We feel restless, we feel agitated, we feel bored. But when we can sit in that agitation and sit in that discomfort and just acknowledge the discomfort, eventually it turns into an inward journey where we might discover things in our psyche that we've been afraid to come to terms with. Fear of dying is a big one that many of us don't want to think about. We don't want to think, I'm going to die. What's going to happen? That's a scary thought for many of us. And that's often a reason people are afraid to sit still because we have to kind of come to terms with these repressed fears that can be scary. So my point is, I really like that you like corpse pose, but I think there's a lot of different tools that are readily available to kind of access uh, different aspects of our consciousness. And when we apply these tools, we start to feel a sense of connection and a sense of unity with everyone and everything. And it's really hard to articulate in words because I don't know if I have the vocabulary to even explain what that feels like. But to me, it feels like a sense of freedom. So, going back to the topic of freedom, I really want to believe that freedom exists, and there's some science that is definitely leans towards determinism, but quantum mechanics, for instance, is another field that sort of supports um, the free will, and there's other theories out there that is supportive of free will. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I'm more of a compatibilist, I would say, but I like to keep an open mind and I like to have these conversations. So I'm just very grateful that you're willing to chat with me and share your thoughts about it. What else? Do you want to talk briefly about the Descartes quote?
Yeah, we could talk about I think therefore I am, but I just want to add one thing is like I do believe in free will. Um, and I think that like the shared consciousness that we're talking about through like there's this great podcast called the Telepathy Tapes that was referenced um and stuff like that. It's just really interesting to just consider those other mindsets that are interesting. I think that um Taoism talks about the way, and it's the way to kind of live. It actually says you can't really talk about it because the more you talk about it, the more it gets confused or whatever.
Mm.
But flowing within the way, I feel like there is a natural way of life. And the more you tap into it, like the more kind of in the zone you feel,
Mm-hmm.
or however you experience just like truly feeling connected and loved and in what you just described. I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, that is the way, and that is something where I don't know how much I should say, but I like taking mushrooms sometimes. And I
Mm-hmm.
do feel connected when I do
Mm-hmm.
that. And I do it for more spiritual reasons than as kind of a party drug or anything like that. And it's something where I love altering my thoughts and my frame of consciousness and all that stuff and just checking myself and how I'm living my life. And if I'm a good dog owner, a good parent, a good cat owner, a good homeowner, like how things I take for granted on day day by day, I have to come to terms with that. And I feel connected and I feel spiritually aligned and I feel at one with everything. And I think that um my friend Ben, who's another yoga instructor, talked about shrooms can briefly trigger the highest state of consciousness. And I really do believe that that happens. But yeah, we can get into Nietzsche, get to Descartes and stuff. I just really liked the last thing you said.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. So Descartes' famous quote is, I think, therefore I am. And originally meant to ground free will and self-awareness. But there are some modern thinkers, Freud, Nietzsche, that challenge the idea that the I may not be truly autonomous. So if our hunger, fears, or unconscious biases guide our thoughts, how free are our thoughts? How much control do we actually have over our thoughts? So his whole thing was, well, the fact that I am doubting and questioning means I'm thinking, and if I can think, therefore I am. So what do you make of all this?
Um, yeah, I kind of well, I like Nietzsche as a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
Just he would say outrageous statements
Mm-hmm.
that people oftentimes um thought like he was crazy or
Yeah.
stuff like that. But like the more he explained it, the more real it was. This one I just that was a very early philosophical quote when Descartes said that, and it was really interesting to hear just Nietzsche totally dismantle him.
Mm-hmm.
And because he dedicated a lot of Beyond Good or Evil, which is a book that he wrote about this specific quote, and I agree with him. I think that um, in a lot of ways, just the fact that the I am thinking does not prove our existence or prove the existence of actually us. Because what are we? Like we don't really know. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
are like, what is the thing that is doing the thinking? Like
Yeah.
our heart is pumping blood, which is powering our brain. What are we? Are we just our bodies?
Mm-hmm.
Is our thoughts living and dying with each pump of our heart, which is powering our brain? Like where is the is it up here or is it here? Like where is the us?
Yeah.
Is it even in us? Is it around us? Is it the energy that we have that is not created or destroyed and it just goes to something else? Like we there's no determining factor for what the I is.
Yeah.
So therefore I am is such a broad statement that I think that like, well, you're are you? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which I think is it's really kind of great because, like, of course, like on the surface, it seems like a profound statement. It seems like something that everyone would agree with. But the more you dig into it, and the beautiful thing about like just how philosophy kind of started for me was just it breaks point by point by point by point down. Like
Yeah.
it gets to the science of statements and words
Mm-hmm.
in a really amazing way. And I think that I really loved how Nietzsche interpreted this. And it caused me, a college student at the time, just learning this quote, um, really to put my own biases aside and really be a true critical thinker.
Yeah. You have to examine every word, right? I think, therefore I am. Okay, well then what is I? And that is an elusive concept. Many argue that I is just a construct shaped by desires, drives, context, that the I is not something we necessarily have control over. And if we are just chemical compounds, and if our thoughts are just derived from chemical compounds, how much responsibility do we actually have over our thoughts, our actions? How much responsibility do we even have over our I? So if you can't define what the I is, then you can't be on board with this quote. And also, you have to ask, okay, well, I think, therefore I am. Well, how do we know that we're thinking? Or do we just think that we're thinking? What does it mean to think? Do we only think in language? And how, for instance, like a tree, okay? Does a tree think the same way that we do? So if a tree doesn't think the same way that we do, does that mean it doesn't exist as the same way we do? So I definitely think there's flaws in this logic. I think therefore I am. Um, and yeah, like trying to figure out what the I even is. Is it a body? Is it a brain? Is it, you know, what is the I? It's a great question.
Yeah. And I think the telepathy tapes, like
Mhm.
it's a podcast I recently finished, it talks about these people with nonverbal autism that are using letterboards and stuff to
Mhm.
communicate. And they talk about spiritual bodies and stuff like that. And they're able to have a telepathic link with certain people. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it's pretty interesting that like to think that our consciousness is not necessarily in our body. You know, we might be part of this shared consciousness.
Mhm.
And so that puts the I or whatever we think it is on its head because where is thoughts even originating from? Like what even are we? And so it's just like it's interesting because like a thought is definitely occurring. We're definitely having like things that are happening in our brain to tell us, oh, we're hungry. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need to do that. Like our body like exists in some capacity, but like it could be all a simulation. Like we could all be just we could be a brain in a vat and we could be
Mhm.
being fed information or we could be part of a matrix. Like there is no real determining factor that determines that like we have thoughts uh we exist in some capacity, you know what I mean, like but to that statement all the way through um has flaws that we can't really what I think is great because it's like the dismantling of what Descartes said, who I honestly didn't like reading more about him because he talks about like beasts and stuff like that and just kind of like has a very hierarchical way of thinking of like how humans, which at the time maybe he was dealing with really crass people, but I just didn't like his like kind of elitist mindset throughout reading him,
Yeah.
like to hear him be debunked by every philosopher basically to make,
Mhm.
and that's how philosophers make their mark, right? See problems with some other philosophers' work, and then they go off on like they make entire books basically discrediting those philosophers,
Yeah.
and I think it's interesting because um, in a very abstract sense, like you agree with him, but when you start really kind of nitpicking, like what you're saying, word by word basis, um, I think that's where really that we can start debunking, and it goes into what this larger topic is freedom a choice,
Mhm.
or is freedom an illusion? Um, because we have to determine um, where what we really are to determine what freedom actually is, I think. And I
Yeah.
think everything can be an illusion in a lot of ways. And of course, I'm in this maybe a compatibilist, maybe free will, but thinks our free will is much more narrow than we want to perceive that it is.
Hmm.
But it's something where we really have to start thinking about if uh, getting rid of that ego, really like trying to just self-examine uh, that stuff. Sorry, I had a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and I also think that the when you start dissecting a quote word by word, it's a reminder that language is also limited in how we perceive and communicate and experience the world. Um, Language is often how we often think with words, with language. But I think that we sometimes think beyond words, but we just don't have the words to articulate those types of thoughts, right? So, I think language is such a powerful tool, but having these conversations also just reminds me of the limits of language, how language is just a construct we invented to try to make sense of this world, but it's really not enough to have all the answers. So, um, I'm at a point now where I feel like we may not be fully free, uh, but maybe we're not fully imprisoned either. And I definitely think that our choices are often related to our past, our biology, our society, but we can still respond to those influences creatively. And it definitely feels like I make conscious, free choices. So, yeah, I keep an open mind. I'm not totally sure how to answer those questions. Are we free? Is everything determined? I can kind of understand both perspectives. Compatibilism seems to make sense, but I think there might be more to it than that too. So, yeah, but I just love having these conversations. So, thank you for joining me. Any other thoughts before we say goodnight here?
Yeah, just something that you said. The thing about language, it's
Mhm.
just listening to telepathy tapes and it's just fresh because I just listened to it. Nonverbal people with autism feel like telepathy is the superior way of communicating, just being in someone's head and doing that. The kids who they examine actively talk about this, and they feel like it's a chore to write things out and do all this stuff. It's ineffective means of communicating, and I think that's like really kind of interesting. Just thinking about that,
Mhm.
it's it's what we're doing is always how we come across. Just anyone can misinterpret what we're saying or our inflections or just it's like the difference between texting and talking to someone in person. Like someone could not get your joke or
Mhm.
any of the stuff, but like I guess it's the same, the jump from like texting to talking to from talking to telepathy. It's like
Mhm.
you're in their head. So you know their thoughts. And so I think that's a really, really interesting and profound way is language does hold us back a lot. And I think that it's interesting as like through this journey of figuring out what we are, who we are, uh, um, keeping keeping it in mind that um, our means of just interacting with the world is ineffective. And I think sitting with that, because I agree with you. I think there's more to it than just a label of compatibility. What is it?
Compatibilism.
Compatibilism
Yeah.
or
There's libertarianism, not in like the political sense, but in the philosophical context, libertarianism, libertarian. a libertarian believes that we have free will, right? In the philosophical context. Determinists believe everything's predetermined by something that happened before. And then compatibilists think both exist, but they kind of change their lens on freedom. So, but yeah, I mean, we're not bound by just those labels either, is my point. We're not bound to subscribe to only those particular points of view. We can create our own point of view, even if we can't articulate it with words, because we don't have the language for it yet. And basically what you were saying, I mean, 97% of communication is nonverbal. So, I mean, I definitely think it's possible that there are people, we all have a sense of intuition. Um, so I didn't really listen to the telepathy tapes as much as I'd like to, but I want to listen to that because I'm very intrigued by this possibility of uh, having a heightened sense of perception and being able to read people's minds and things like that. I think it's definitely possible. So
And I think we do have that in waves. Like
yeah,
when someone's about to text us or call
yeah,
us,
happens all the
and
time.
or we're just thinking about someone and that happens, or if someone's looking at us and we can sense that they're looking at us, but it's not through our senses. I think that we do have a way of tapping into something that is kind of collective.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that it's easy. It's hard to believe and it blows your mind because it did for me multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's not really hard for me to believe just because I feel like I've had many examples in my life where I'll think about someone and I haven't thought about them in a long time and then they reach out.
yeah,
I've
no,
also
no,
had
no,
dreams
no,
before
and
that have come
I'm not
true.
saying that. I'm saying more of the fact that just the content of the celebrity tapes and
Oh
everything
yeah, yeah.
that they discuss. I mean, those things I think are pretty universal. I mean, at least most people I talk to,
Yeah.
and me too, it happens so much more frequently now that
Hmm.
I feel like I manifest things.
Yeah.
After listening to telepathy tapes, I feel like, oh, I can kind of like mirror this feeling of when someone texted me last time or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Let me see if it works. And it does sometimes. It's crazy. And it's like,
Hmm.
and it's like even a friend, I was texting with them and she was saying like you always seem to text me right when I think about it. And
Oh.
I was like, that is so crazy. It's working. I'm just joking. But it's funny that like that we since since that since I listened to that podcast, it's really amazing that um it's really kind of amazing how I've applied it to my own life in ways, but it's just scratching the surface of what there is. And it will I can't wait to talk to you about after you listen to it because it's
Yeah.
really going on.
Yeah, I'm very excited to check out the telepathy tapes podcast. And anyone else listening, if you listen to the telepathy tapes podcast, comment below, let us know your thoughts. Also, if you're listening out there, I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you think about free will versus determinism, compatibilism. I love to hear what you think about the poems we read or any of the topics we discuss. I'd love to hear from you. So comment below. Let's keep the conversation going. And yeah, anything else you'd like to share before we part ways? All right.
No,
Stay
just thanks for listening.
curious. Thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, keep an open mind and stay keep your sense of wonder. I call this wonder and whimsy because I think it's important to wonder and it's fun to wonder. So All right. Thanks for listening. Take care.